Hi, I'm Kerry. I'm from V Dorset, a vegetarian and vegan catering business based in Poole, and I'm going to show you how to make a Portobello Mushroom Wellington, perfect for Christmas Day, and a red wine sauce. So the first thing I'm going to do to make my Wellingtons is cook my mushrooms. So I've got flat mushrooms here because unfortunately I couldn't get Portobello mushrooms, but it's basically going to be the same principle for both. I always peel my mushrooms. It's mainly for aesthetic reasons because it makes them look nice and neat. You could then use the peel to make a mushroom stock, or you could put it in your gravy so it won't go to waste. So I'm just going to peel these. So once the mushrooms are peeled, I'm just going to drizzle them with a little bit of oil, a bit of sea salt, and then I'm just going to strip a couple of sprigs of thyme. Okay, now these are going to go into the oven for roughly 8 minutes. You really want them to be just cooked. You don't want them to be overcooked because they are going to go back in once they're within the pastry and everything's put together. The reason why we pre-cook them is to make sure that as much of the moisture as possible has come out, otherwise you're going to end up with a big soggy mess when you come to cook your pastry. So the next thing I'm going to do is cook some red onions. I've got 2 diced red onions here. I'm just going to put them in a pan with a little bit of oil. You can start them off on quite a high heat. Just wait till your oil's nice and hot first. Going to season them up with a pinch of salt. So you can leave these on high for a minute or two until they start to sort of colour around the edges. Then you want to turn it right down. And we're going to cook them for around 8 to 10 minutes until they're really cooked through, they're nice and caramelised, and all the sweetness has been brought out into them. Okay. So these have been cooking for about 8 minutes now. They're really, really nice and soft. If you taste them, they'll taste lovely and sweet. It's worth tasting them just to make sure you've got enough salt in there. So I'm going to get these out. So now I've done my onions, next I'm going to wilt off some watercress. So you can treat watercress exactly like spinach, it wilts down in the same way, but it has a much stronger flavour. So for this, it's just for 2 people this recipe, but I'm going to use a whole bag of watercress because as I said, it will come down a lot and you're going to lose a lot of moisture out of it. So once your oil's hot, you can add it in there. Good pinch of salt. I'm just going to keep it moving because you don't want too much cooking on one area of it, otherwise it will burn. Just keep stir frying it for a minute or 2 until it's all wilted. This is all wilted off nicely, so I'm just going to take it off the heat. Now because of the colour, we need to get this cooled down as quickly as possible or it might turn brown, so I'm just going to run it in some cold water. Now because we're putting this into pastry, it's really important that we get as much of the liquid out of it as possible. And this is just the same as spinach. If you were going to use spinach, you do exactly the same. So we're just going to squeeze out as much as we can. So by now your mushrooms should be cooked. Now with all these fillings, we need to make sure they're completely chilled before we start building them into our pastry base, otherwise it will never stay together. So now I'm going to put all this in the fridge. It's going to probably need about 20 minutes to half an hour before it's all cool, and then we can bring it back out and start building our Wellingtons. So the next thing we're going to do is to build our Wellingtons. So I've got some pre-made puff pastry here. So most shop-bought puff pastry is suitable for vegans, but it's always worth just double checking the ingredients just to be sure. You can make your own. Vegan puff pastry is achievable. You can use vegetable fat in place of butter. There's all sorts of different recipes out there. But yeah, if you're just looking for convenience, you want it to be quick, then there's no harm in we use Just Roll, so there's no harm in buying it. I'm going to roll it out onto a floured surface. You want it to be roughly the thickness of a £1 coin. good tip to get it nice and even is just to fill around the edges. That way you can tell if there's any thicker bits or slightly thinner bits. Okay, so next we're going to build them. So first of all, I'm going to cut the pastry into the shape I'm looking for. There is going to be some excess here, so you could probably use slightly less than a full block if you wanted to use another bit for later. Now I'm going to brush this pastry with wasabi mustard. This is made using English wasabi. It's the only mustard of its type available. And it just adds a little bit of extra depth to the flavour. And particularly because this is vegetarian, you sort of want to get anything you can in there to make sure it's really like rich and tasty. You need to make sure you're leaving a bit of a border around the outside so that it all sticks. So the first thing we're going to do is put a bit of watercress on the bottom of each one. And then we want a nice spoonful of your caramelised onions. Place on your mushrooms. And then I'm going to put a little bit more onion inside. And some more watercress. And then on top, your second mushroom. Just going to take the stalks out of these top ones so that they sit nicely. So to help the pastry stick, I've made a vegan egg wash. This is made with oat milk, a little bit of maple syrup and a little bit of vegetable oil, and it should make it stick, and it also adds a nice glaze when you put it on top. So now I'm going to fold it over. Make sure you're pressing down really nice and firmly. You also want to try and avoid air bubbles as much as possible. I'm going to trim off the excess pastry. And then just to crimp the edges, I'm just going to go around with a fork. It looks nice, and it also just makes sure that they are actually sealed. You could make a full-size Wellington in the same way if you wanted to. If you wanted to put a row of mushrooms on a big sheet of pastry and fold it over if you were cooking for multiple people. I sort of designed this with the thought that a lot of people might have one vegetarian coming round or one vegan person coming round for Christmas dinner. So we're going to put our Wellingtons on a lined baking tray. And I'm just going to brush them with the same glaze we used earlier. Now, to get a really good glaze on these, what you want to do is glaze them initially a first time, pop them into the fridge for 10 minutes, and then do a secondary glaze back in the fridge, and then put it straight in the oven. And that makes sure you get a really nice, thick, layered shine on top of it. So now it's been in for a further 10 minutes, which means your pastry should be nice and chilled, which is quite important. So what I'm going to do is take a sharp knife, just going to lightly score over the top. This is more for decoration than anything. And the beauty of these is, unlike a beef Wellington where you now have to be worried about how you're going to cook your beef and how long to leave it in the oven for, the filling of this is already cooked. So all you're looking for really is for your pastry to be nice and golden. Ideally you want it to be nice and golden on the bottom and not soggy as well, which is why you've tried to get rid of all that moisture in the watercress. So now that's scored, I'm going to put it into a preheated oven. It's going to take around 30 to 40 minutes, but you should just keep an eye on it. I've got my oven at 190. Okay, so next I'm going to show you how to make a vegan gravy to go with your Wellingtons. So I've got a pan on the heat. I'm just going to add in a drizzle of vegetable oil. Now here I've chopped up 1 carrot, a medium-sized carrot, 1 stick of celery and 1 onion. I've left the skin on the onion because it really helps give a nice colour. So, and a bay leaf as well. So once the oil's hot in here, we're just going to add in our veg. Now you do want to cook this for quite a long time because although you don't want it to burn, you do need it to caramelise because that's where a lot of your flavour is coming from, especially because you're going to be using vegetable stock rather than a meat stock. So you really need to make sure you're getting as much as you can out of the vegetables. So once your veg is nice and caramelised, we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of flour. That's to make the gravy thick. Next we're going to add 2 teaspoons of really good quality blackcurrant jam. Just adds a really nice sweetness and a depth of flavour. Next we're going to add in 150 millilitres of red wine. It's always worth checking if you're cooking for vegans that you've got vegan red wine. So we'll just bring that to a simmer. And then finally we're going to add 150 millilitres of vegetable stock. Now once you've brought this to the boil, you're going to need to turn it down and let it simmer for a good 10-15 minutes, possibly more, because you want the veg to be soft. You want it to have cooked through so that you've extracted most of the flavour from it. So once your veg is soft and your gravy is at the right consistency, you want to pour it through a strainer. When you push it through the sieve, you really want to push those vegetables through because they're nice and soft. You'll push through lots of the nice flavoursome bits. So don't just throw it away without really squeezing everything you can out of it. And that's it, that's your vegan gravy. So now you've got that ready to go with your Wellington. You can keep it to one side and just reheat it once you need it, or you could actually keep this in the fridge or freezer now. So these have had about 30 minutes in the oven. You can see they're nice and golden on top. And if you look underneath, you can see they're nice and cooked on the bottom. There's no soggy bottoms. And there we go, there's our red wine gravy and our Portobello Mushroom Wellingtons.